FPX have just won Masters Copenhagen, the second Masters event to happen in 2022, and may have done so with the most incredible, tumultuous, and trying story of any team in Valorant thus far. At the start of 2022, FPX entered the VCT circuit with a slightly refreshed roster. They had graduated Dimisic and Shadow and brought in Ardis and Sugetsu to join along with Xiao, Angel, and Zipan. This version of the roster had only played together in the Red Bull home ground tournament at the end of 2021 and had entered into the CIS qualifiers in the hopes of making it back to the main VCT circuit. They made their way through these qualifiers, they got all the way to the grand finals where they beat Na'Vi 3-2. Zipan, Xiao, Angel, and Sugetsu all got in the top 5 KDs of the closed qualifiers, and Zipan, Xiao, and Sugetsu all got in the top 5 cast percentages of the closed qualifiers. They ended up coming first in their group in stage 1 of the EMEA challenges, and as a direct result of this success, they got a bye round into the second round of the playoffs for the EMEA challenges playoffs. However, this is already where FPX started to face some hardship. Given that they had 2 Russian players and 1 Ukrainian player, they were set to be one of the hardest hit by the current ongoing war in Ukraine. They were allowed to bring in an emergency sub of Batty G, but what it did mean is that it was very unlikely that they were going to be playing as a full roster at all for the rest of the EMEA stage. Yet, despite this situation, the team ended up playing the fewest number of maps of any team in the entire bracket, thanks to their 2-0 victories over Team Liquid and Fnatic. And not only was this with Batty G subbing in for Angel, but he also then later subbed in for Ardis as well, and was thus flexing for the roles for the team. Making it into the top 3 guaranteed them a spot at Masters Reykjavik, the first international LAN that FPX would be attending. This was a huge milestone for them and a massive achievement, especially considering all of the hardship that these players and the org were facing. 3-1 victory over G2 in the grand finals cemented in stone that FPX were in fact the best team in EMEA right now, and they were so ready to prove that to the rest of the world in Iceland. And then they couldn't go to Iceland. Unfortunately, through no fault of their own, FunPlus Phoenix will not be able to field a complete roster in Reykjavik. The dreaded statement was released. FPX weren't going to Masters Reykjavik. It was a combination of factors ultimately. Angel, Xiao, and Sugetsu all had war-invoked travel restrictions preventing them from entering Iceland, and then Ardis had recently contracted COVID, which in and of itself meant he couldn't enter Iceland. And ultimately, Riot was being very sympathetic by giving them a lot of relaxed rules on what they could and couldn't do to try and field a roster, but ultimately the problem of roster continuity was still there. They had to have 3 out of the 5 original players show up and be part of the roster that was playing at Masters Reykjavik, and FPX simply couldn't do that. In good faith, they were given 200 global standings points and $25,000 of the prize pool, but everybody knew that there was a chance that they could have made it so much further than that, and there was just no way for these players to show it for themselves. Their first ever event had been taken away. After watching Team Liquid take their place and everyone else compete in Iceland, FPX had to return back to the drawing board and just hope that they would be able to qualify for the next LAN event in order to get their redemption. In stage 2 of challenges, they had less good fortune in the group stage. Rather than coming out on top, they clocked in at 3rd place with losses to Fnatic and Ascend and just scraping their way into the playoffs. This time it meant no bye, so an entire extra round to try and fight their way through. The first team they had to face in playoffs was Team Liquid, the very team who had taken their spot in Reykjavik. And they won. The small steps to redemption were being taken. Maybe making it to the next Masters event wasn't going to be so impossible after all. And then Fnatic happened. In fact, Fnatic happening would end up being a long-standing blight on the efforts of FPX, but Fnatic happening right now meant they were going down into the lower bracket, and suddenly their chances of qualifying for Masters looked way less secure. But it ended up being the lower bracket run they needed. A win against Ascend, who'd beaten them in the group stage, done. Victory over Mech, another CIS team desperately trying to fight through the political turmoil the world was putting them through and show who they could be again. That was enough to stamp FPX's ticket to Copenhagen. Miraculously, they had been given their second chance. In fact, with another win over Guild, FPX did once again make it to the grand finals of EMEA. They suffered a loss to, you guessed it, Fnatic, but ultimately that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had another shot at showing what they could do internationally. Now, before the team could even get to Copenhagen, it had to be seen if they were even going to be able to make it. The war in Ukraine was still ongoing, and so it could be that a repeat of Reykjavik was just right on their doorstep. FPX reportedly had 3 subs ready to go in case of an absolute roster disaster, but luckily, they didn't need them. Well, they didn't need all of them. Angel and Shao were good to go. In fact, Angel being allowed to go was just short of a miracle. But Sugetsu was still having visa problems. It was announced that he was not going to be able to make the group stage, and so FPX took along Alliance's Cider to be a sub for him. But they didn't even get to practice that much before the event began. In fact, it was so expected that Shao also wouldn't be able to get his visa on time that they had been practicing with a second sub. There was only 1 day, reportedly, of practice for this team that actually involved the roster that would be playing in the group stages. So, cool. You've got to Copenhagen, but can you actually get through Copenhagen? FPX was in the arguably easier group of the 2 that were at the event, but their first series was rough. They were playing against Xerxia, the Thai team who were no strangers to playing at Masters, and they barely scraped by with a win. They had to win their permaban in overtime and then force the decider into a very close victory just to get there. Then it was up against DRX, and once again they got flattened on their own map pick, with just as poor an outcome on the decider, which was another map FPX usually feel comfortable playing. Only their game against Northampton looked at all dominant, and without it, they wouldn't have been able to scrape into the playoffs. A map differential of exactly 0, FPX had really gotten in by the skin of their teeth. And one of the really big stories was that of individual performances, particularly of Angel. He is one of, if not the most experienced player who is in Valorant right now, with 17 years of professional play under his belt. His IGLing is revered by people in multiple games, and his mechanical skill is impressive, especially considering the role he plays and his age. But his stats were rough. He was the 5th lowest ACS in the whole of the group stage at 157.4, the 2nd lowest KD at 0.7, the 2nd lowest cast percentage at 61, the 5th lowest ADR at 103.6, and the 3rd lowest KPR at 0.54. It was all questionable, and no one really knew what to expect of their playoffs performance. Teams like Fnatic and FPX were still yet to be mixed in with the competition, and people had a lot of hope for Optic to be able to spring back from some of the poorer showings that they'd had at the beginning of the group stage. But then Sugetsu showed up. And this was really, like, Sugetsu is young, and LANs are intimidating. They're a new environment, they're loud, they're alien. One of the biggest questions that we ask as analysts when we're looking at young players or young teams who are going to their first LAN is, are they actually going to be able to hold up in that environment, or are they going to crumble? Well, Sugetsu played like a fucking monster. It was as if he had been bootcamping for months just for this. He was just ready. There was so much pressure on this man's shoulders to come in and be that missing piece for FPX and kind of save the team, and he understood the assignment. The first playoffs opponent was Fnatic, and again, Fnatic just happened. They knew this team, but Fnatic were on fire. FPX's map pick of Haven turned into an embarrassing 4-13 loss for them. It sent them down into the lower bracket instantly, while Fnatic continued on unscathed. That's demoralizing. But FPX had been here before. In EMEA Stage 2, they made that lower bracket run. Why the hell should they not be able to now? They had their full roster back. They were all playing together for the first time on a global stage. First it was Guild. Well, they'd done that before in the EMEA playoffs. Done. Then DRX, their Group B rivals who had beaten them in groups, 2-0'd. And then it was Fnatic again. Then it was Fnatic again, and it was in front of a crowd. Loud, screaming, and people love Fnatic. They lost their map pick in overtime. Fnatic picked off Split, and then it was Bind, and man, this is the map that FPX have spent so long avoiding. And Fnatic had always been that Bind team for a long, long time, and FPX fucking won it. 13-7. So we're in map 3, and this could go either way. And FPX just crushed Fnatic in it. Sugetsu went 20-9 in this map. It's disgusting. And when Fnatic failed to win the second half pistol, you just know it's over. This was the team that ended FPX at every step. They were their kryptonite. And yet with just a couple of days of playing as a full roster, FPX had elevated themselves to a point where they can overcome that at the most important point of their careers so far. So then it's the lower bracket finals against Optic, the incumbent Masters champions, and they destroy them. Optic just could not get a foothold in this game. 3-1, and it's the grand finals, baby. To get to this point, FPX have been through so much. Victory followed by opportunities that should have been theirs. Tenacity to force themselves to do it again, not knowing if it's possible or even if they'd be denied the chance again. Hardship and compromise, working with sub after sub and always being ready to accept their roster may be picked apart by external circumstances. And now redemption, sitting on a grand finals stage at the first ever global event with an audience staring back at them. FPX were one of the scariest opponents they could have hoped to face at Masters Copenhagen. Everybody knows how uniquely they play and how much they can just destroy your team if you're not ready. And not only that, but FPX were the upper bracket team. They were calling the shots on the map bans. FPX were just gonna have to take whatever they gave them and hope for the best. And my god, what a grand finals it was. All 5 maps. A thrashing on Bind, making FPX look like amateurs. 11 straight rounds in a row. Forsaken's Yoru was rendered inert. Then Icebox, FPX's map pick. They couldn't put a defense together, and Artis and Shao struggling to pop off like they had done throughout the rest of the playoffs. Fracture, and once again, Sugetsu is proving that this map is his stomping grounds. His Viper is just elite. Haven, and the half is way closer. FPX have a 2-1 lead and they just need to pull this one through to take the victory, but they cannot coordinate their attack well enough. It's been 1-13-3 and 3-13-7s, and it is all coming down to this last map. It's Breeze. And there's the trap card. The Neon and Yoru and Astra for FPX, and then FPX using a comp they haven't used since the CIS closed qualifiers in January. What in the freaking hell? And the rounds weren't even traded here. It was like 5 rounds here, then 3 rounds, and then 6 rounds. It swung like a goddamn pendulum. But in the end, FPX's attack just dominated. And now they're standing there and they're the champions. They did that. After all of that, everything that they had gone through to get right here, all of that hardship, all of what they had earned and been unable to capitalize on, and they were actually looking out at a crowd as the champions of Masters Copenhagen. They had done that. So you know what? That 100% is maybe the coolest story that we have of any team in Valorant, to have gone through all of that and ended up right here. And it just made this one of the best events that we've seen in this esports so far. You guys, I would love to hear your thoughts on FPX and everything about Masters Copenhagen. Did you think they were going to be able to do it? Because honestly, I didn't. I went into the event thinking that Fnatic were going to come out the victors, and Fnatic got pretty freaking close. But they didn't win when it mattered. I honestly think the story of this team has been so impressive and so incredible and just fantastic to follow along with. And at every point that's happened so far in 2022, you have not been able to feel anything but heartbreak for every time their earned victories have been taken away from them, and now they can finally say they actually got there and they actually made it. They have the highest number of circuit points in EMEA, so we're definitely going to be seeing them at Champions, and who knows, maybe they'll be able to prove it again there. But for now, we just know that they've done something incredible here in Copenhagen, and that is really a reason to celebrate. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about everything, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.